Well, this took a lot longer to get to than I thought. Where have I been? Well, it's a long story. In short, I started my Bachelor of Arts in Game Design in September, and yeah, that's been keeping me pretty busy. I've also lost 40 pounds since my last review, meaning that by the time Abby finishes editing our Wario World collab review, I'll actually look like this, and not like this. Dithering! Oh, and I also adopted a kitten somewhere in there.
Okay. Hello. Do you love Daddy?
In any event, I'm back, and I'm stronger than ever. And I'm gonna spend my winter break wrapping up some unfinished business from the summer moons. Greetings and welcome back, gentles and ladiesmen, to another fantastic episode of Cross Platform, a review segment where I look at the classics of the past to see whether they hold up today, with a special emphasis on comparing them to contrasting contemporary releases. You'll recall that contrasting contemporary releases include cross-platform ports as well as different games of the same name released in the same generation. Meanwhile, Remake or Rebreak is about subsequent significant re-releases. Remakes, reboots, reimaginings, and enhanced ports released a significant period after the originals. In the last couple episodes, I reviewed Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie on Remake or Rebreak. I highly recommend watching those videos first for continuity's sake. Today, we're gonna pick up with the third game in the series, Banjo Kazooie-Grunty's Revenge, released for Game Boy Advance in 2003 and Java 2 Mobile Edition in 2004. Yes, this is a thing that exists. Mobile games might seem like cash grabs now, but these shitty flip phone games were the real deal. So, let's go ahead and jump on in. This is Grunty's Revenge cross-platform. Grunty's Revenge takes place 2 months after Banjo Kazooie and 22 months before Banjo Tooie, making this game an interquel. Banjo and Kazooie successfully defeated Gruntilda the Witch, sending her tumbling down her mountain lair and trapping her beneath a humongous boulder. While our favorite buddy duo return to a peaceful life on Spiral Mountain, Grunty remains trapped, with her assistant Klungo unsuccessfully attempting to dislodge the boulder. About 2 months later, Klungo asks Grunty to leave her body under the boulder and possess a robotic body so she can exact vengeance on Banjo and Kazooie. So, if Klungo could build an advanced robot body in literally 10 seconds, why couldn't he just build the drill to destroy the boulder instead? You know, like that one? That just seems like the more sensible solution than pushing a rock for 2 months straight and then asking your boss to transfer her soul to a machine. Anyways, Grunty agrees and fuses her soul with the robot, becoming Mecha Grunty. She then proceeds to kidnap Kazooie and flees to the past, intending to prevent the buddy duo from meeting to undo her defeat in the first game. Mumbo Jumbo uses his magic to send Banjo into the past as well, where he meets up with Bottle's ancestor, Bozai the Mole. With Bozai's help, Banjo sets off to rescue Kazooie, defeat Mecha Grunty, and restore the space-time continuum. As I've argued in the previous 2 reviews, the purpose of story in gaming is to contextualize and motivate gameplay. Particularly in a collectathon where players are saddled with collecting a laundry list of useless crap, it's very important that players feel like this knick-knack hunting has some kind of greater purpose. Otherwise, they'll get bored or frustrated. Banjo-Kazooie did this well by utilizing the Gruntilda effect, an approach to video game storytelling that frames the action around getting even with a compelling antagonist the player loves to hate. Banjo-Tooie took a similar approach with an explosive intro that made Gruntilda even more despicable than ever before, only for the tension to fizzle in the middle due to a lack of story updating cutscenes. So, how does Grunty's Revenge fare? Having not yet played Nuts and Bolts to completion, I would consider this the worst plot in the series. There are several interlocking reasons for this, but the biggest is that Grunty's Revenge is an interquel, meaning we already know how it's gonna end before the game even begins. Banjo and Kazooie will reunite and defeat Mecha Grunty, leaving her body and soul trapped under the boulder to set up the events of Tooie. This instantly relieves any tension or stakes the plot might have had, making it difficult to emotionally invest in playing the game to see how it ends. There are ways to build tension and stakes into a prequel or interquel like this. For example, we know Samus will make it through Other M to appear alive at the beginning of Fusion. However, the story creates a mystery as to the nature of the bottle ship as well as the identity of the mysterious deleter, which drives the player forward. Furthermore, those who played Fusion first will experience the dramatic irony of knowing something will happen to Adam Malkovich, but not what or when. Granted, Other M doesn't exactly pay off well on these premises, but there's plenty there to engage the player despite knowing the status quo at the start of Fusion. Grunty's revenge, meanwhile, is completely predictable and devoid of plot. The only plot points are to rescue Kazooie, which you do by the second level, and defeat Grunty, which is guaranteed given the opening of Tooie. Everything plays out exactly as you'd expect it to, and the game ends not a second sooner. So therefore, talking about the story would serve no purpose beyond filling the timestamp of this video, since it's simply inconsequential at best. So let's talk about the story. So, is it at least entertaining like the first two games? Not really. I don't know what it is, but Grunty's Revenge just lacks energy and personality. For all my criticisms of Banjo-Tooie, that game had excellent comedic chops and the characters all emoted and expressed themselves in unique ways. Kazooie particularly elevated that script with her sarcasm and nihilistic attitude toward NPCs. Here, the NPCs have absolutely no personality whatsoever, and the only moments of levity come with Kazooie's brief exchanges with Bozai the Mole. Even Gruntilda rarely shows up and has nothing interesting to say. Thankfully, all the text is skippable with the A button, so if you don't care, you can mash your way through it and move on. Not only is Grunty's Revenge a pointless interquel, but it's also a time travel story, which have a rightfully mixed reputation. Sure, once in a while you get a Chrono Trigger or a Steins Gate, but then you also get a Sonic 06 or a Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. The latter being one of the sloppiest scripts in video game history for reasons Jay and TGX have thoroughly covered at this point. Unless you take the Steins Gate approach of making the mechanics of time travel the focus of the plot, the other best option is to minimize the time travel element and keep the story simple. Grunty's Revenge opts for the latter, but goes so far that it might as well not even be a time travel story at all. Supposedly, Grunty travels to the past to prevent our main characters from meeting, but past Banjo and past Kazooie never appear in this game at all, nor does Grunty ever try to prevent them from meeting. The only real indication that this takes place in the past is when you meet a younger Captain Blubber. Moreover, if Mumbo and Grunty could both send people back in time, you'd think Mumbo in particular could have used it to prevent Bottle's death or Tootie's kidnapping. Oops. The bigger problem is that Grunty's Revenge doesn't do anything clever or creative with its premise. Levels could have taken the Crash 3 or Ape Escape approach of theming themselves after periods in history, but instead they're archetypes that could have easily been in present day. This ultimately begs the question, why did this game need to be an interquel, let alone a time travel story? This could have just as easily taken place 2 months after Banjo-Tooie, and even would have made more sense, seeing as Grunty was literally just a skull at that point. Just introduce a new character to make the robot suit instead of Klungo, and Bob's your uncle. Perhaps I'm making a Spiral Mountain out of a jam jar silo here, but that doesn't change the fact that this plot doesn't engage players emotionally, nor adequately motivate gameplay. Visually speaking, Grunty's Revenge is a Game Boy Advance game running at 240 by 160p. Regardless of whether you play it on authentic hardware or in an emulator, the game actually looks quite good. Much like the Donkey Kong Country trilogy that preceded it, Rare uses pre-rendered CGI to increase the fidelity, making good use of solid colors and limiting the detail on models to work around the limitations of the GBA. As you'd expect, the sprites and animations all look pretty decent, and gives the game some charm to make up for the boring story. The environments look great as well, offering a decent amount of detail and diversity. As you can tell, the game is an orthographic platformer like the Mario and Luigi games. While this is more of a gameplay criticism, the perspective leads to its share of gameplay snafus. It's not a huge problem, but once in a while it proves somewhat annoying. There's also this one part where there's a narrow walkway suspended above lava. However, the lava doesn't animate or bubble, so I thought it was hay. Visually, the stage archetypes are standard and ape-off equivalents from the first two games. Cliff Farm is Mumbo's Mountain, Breegull Beach is Treasure Trove Cove, Bad Magic Bayou is Bubble Gloop Swamp mixed with Mad Monster Mansion, Spiller's Harbor is Rusty Bucket Bay mixed with Jolly Roger's Lagoon, and Freezing Furnace is Hailfire Peaks mixed with Grunty Industries. The creative stage ideas help the first two games stand out, but Grunty's Revenge just feels like more of the same in this regard. The soundtrack in Grunty's Revenge was composed by Jamie Hughes, who you may remember as the gent who reformatted DKC2's soundtrack for Game Boy Advance. Rare seemingly built a proprietary sound engine that seems to perform a bit better than the default sappy engine. While Grant Kirkhope didn't write for Grunty's Revenge, his unique style carries over to Hughes' composition, right down to the instrument samples sounding distinctly banjo. The actual tracks sound pretty good and reflect the series quality standard up to this point. Unlike how Tui tended to skew more towards atmosphere, Grunty's Revenge is melodically reminiscent of the first game, meaning it comes off as more memorable overall. My favorite tracks are probably Brigo Beach and the boss theme. The only thing that's missing here is the dynamic instrumentation from the console games. And on that note, characters still speak in Phantomylin or Lilat-ese, but there are noticeably fewer sound samples this time. Even Grunty tends to scream a lot while talking normally. In any event, it's a good set of tunes, and the overall sound design is reminiscent of the first two games. Which brings us to the gameplay, and honestly, it's like trying to analyze a baked potato or something. At the very least, I can say Grunty's Revenge is definitely a Banjo Kazooie game, from the mechanics to the control scheme. One positive I can list right off the bat is that I was expecting this game to play like crap due to being formatted for a 2D handheld. However, the controls in Grunty's Revenge feel natural, and the button assignments are comfortable and intuitive. This elevates the exploration, the platforming, and even the combat, which surprisingly feels more responsive than it was in 3D. Platformers are mechanics driven after all, so thankfully good controls are a feather in this game's cap. On that note, the core gameplay of Grunty's Revenge is the same as it ever was. You wander around open sandboxes collecting music notes, jiggies, jinjos, eggs, health, and other collectibles. Collecting things is just inherently satisfying, and if you enjoyed it in the last two games, you'll enjoy it in Grunty's Revenge as well. On the other hand, we have the unlockable moves returning from the console titles. I was fine with this idea in the first game because it was essentially a way to pace out more complicated controls to the player. That, and you started in Spiral Mountain with all the moves you'd expect to have, minus the Talon Trot. Banjo-Tooie even started you off with everything from Kazooie already unlocked. However, beyond a few creative new moves, the unlock system in that game only really served to annoy. It just felt like the designers were running out of new gameplay ideas and had to resort to artificially limiting the player to fill upgrade slots, which led to unnecessary backtracking that made 100% more annoying than it really should have been. Grunty's Revenge somehow manages to get this even worse. Supposedly, traveling back in time wiped Banjo and Kazooie's memories of their moves, which is a contrivance if I've ever heard one. You start out as just Banjo, who can only jump. You learn a stationary attack 1 minute in and the ability to roll 10 minutes in. Once you rescue Kazooie, you'll be annoyed to learn that everything you could do in the first game must be unlocked again. Even moves that you just started out with in the first game. Stuff like shooting eggs, the Talon Trot, the Feathery Flap, the Rat-a-Tap-Rap, which I think that's the first time I've actually said that correctly, and even the Bill Drill. Wait, hold on. So you're telling me that Banjo and Kazooie already learned the Bill Drill between games? That just makes the boulders in Banjo-Tooie even more offensive. One thing I do like is that the egg shooting now functions as Banjo holding Kazooie in the gun mode from the FPS sections in Tooie, which just feels and controls better than the duck and shoot method of the console games. Fire and ice eggs also return along with the new battery eggs, which sound interesting, except eggs are only used for activating these tall walls, which are just glorified switches. Egg types don't really impact the combat whatsoever. Banjo can still swim in this game, and pressing R above bubbly areas will allow him to dive and swim around a la Oho Ocean and Superstar Saga. These sections are kind of fun, but there aren't nearly enough of them, and the orthographic perspective makes them somewhat confusing to play. The Wonder Wing now must be unlocked and requires gold feathers, but for some reason, you also need to find a special pad to use it now. First flight pads, then split up pads, and now this crap. Enough with relegating moves you should just be able to do on command to special pads. pads. There's tension, and then there's handicapping the player for no good reason. And while we're at it, let's just get rid of the move unlock system altogether. None of these moves are especially difficult to figure out, and seeing as 50% of them are things you just start with in the first game, it just feels cheap that I have to unlock them here. No matter how you look at it, this game is no Metroid. Unlocking moves isn't rewarding, and the game would be way more fun if you just started with everything unlocked, minus rescuing Kazooie, of course. Just substitute the Bonsai Hills with optional tutorials and use the music notes to unlock note doors like the first game, and you're golden. Mumbo Jumbo returns and offers 4 unique transformations to play with. There's a mouse for chewing ropes and entering small spaces, a candle for lighting things and destroying burnables, an octopus for traveling across liquid hazards and jumping high out of water, and a tank that's immune to hazards and can open certain doors but also can't jump. What's interesting is that you can play as any of these transformations in every stage with the Mumbo Skull. While a fun idea, you still need to backtrack to Mumbo to change back and forth, complete with an unskippable transformation cutscene. At least Mumbo's house is only 1 floor this time. I enjoyed using the transformations mechanically and using them in multiple levels, but honestly, I would be fine if the next Banjo game got rid of transformations altogether. Level design wise, I'm happy to say that Grunty's Revenge delivers exactly what I want from a collectathon platformer. Unlike the bloated, railroaded progression of Banjo Tooie, this game falls much closer to the confined, open sandboxes of the first game. As long as you have all the moves necessary, you can go to every part of a stage and 100% it in one choreographed run, for the most part. Grunty's Revenge also minimizes the use of indoor areas, making it much easier to remember where you've been and where you haven't. After all the complaining I did about Banjo Tooie's level design in the last review, I wouldn't have it any other way. What's also nice is that unlike Banjo Tooie, which suffered from within and between level backtracking, Grunty's Revenge has only 1 instance of backtracking besides the stuff in the Spiral Mountain Hub, which I don't count personally. You need to unlock the tank in Freezing Furnace and bring it back to Bad Magic Bayou to get the final Jiggy. Frankly, that's pretty stupid and unnecessary, but I'll take 1 instance of backtracking over 15. My biggest criticism level design wise, however, is that there's simply not enough of them. Grunty's Revenge only has 6 levels, including the hub world. By the time Grunty's Revenge started to get challenging and cleverly designed, the game's basically over. This isn't an indie studio developed 3D platformer with complicated HD models and 3D physics like A Hat in Time or Yooka-Laylee. This is a GBA game, and that system wasn't particularly difficult to develop for, so it's reasonable to expect more than 5 stages, especially as short as they are. As is, Grunty's Revenge just feels like the first half of a game rather than a finished product. You want to know something else? This game is really easy, but for some reason I died about 50 times over the course of the adventure. You have unlimited lives and will respawn at the last door you entered, so it's not like it really matters, but it got kind of annoying after a while. While this game is fun, it's also not that challenging or methodical, so it becomes easy to bum rush everything rather than taking your time, which doesn't pair well with the occasionally awkward orthographic perspective. Grunty's Revenge also has its fair share of minigames, but none of them are anything special. One of the most consistent modes is the slide minigame, which is self-explanatory. You move back and forth and collect objects while avoiding hazards. It's pretty easy, except for the fact that the map is oriented in this awkward pseudo 3D perspective, and much like those glorified tech demos from the 2D Sonic games, I'm pretty sure this perspective is the only reason this minigame exists. That would be fine, except all the hazards and collectibles are billboarded 2D sprites. Couple that with a spiral-shaped slide, and it makes it difficult to predict how objects will move up the slide, leading you to run into hazards you would have otherwise avoided. You play this minigame 3 times, as well as a bonus round during the staff roll, and there are no substantial differences besides the look of the hazards and these booster pads that show up in the Spiller's Harbor rendition. This mode is simply okay, nothing special. Next up is fishing. If you've played Funky's Fishing and Donkey Kong Country GBA, you'll recognize this. Essentially, you move Banjo Banjo back and forth and hold the button to cast your lure. The longer you hold the button, the farther the lure will go. Unlike Funky's Fishing, where you could put your lure below several fish and cast them all in as the lure came back up, this minigame will only cast up the fish in that specific lane. And you have to be pretty precise too. If you're more than a few pixels off, it doesn't count. That wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the controls. It's difficult to feel how long you need to hold the button in order to cast your lure at a specific lane, which doesn't pair well with the precise collision detection. There's this giant gauge at the top of the screen that could help, except you need to be looking at the bottom of the screen to keep track of the fish, and your eyes can only really focus on one thing at a time. Oh, and I should mention that in the second and final rounds, you have to pull in fish while avoiding snippets. That's fine, but in the final round, the collectibles are both below the surface, and there are no clear signifiers to help you tell them apart, making it a big guessing game. Funky's Fishing is a fun minigame with tight controls and straightforward arcade gameplay, while this is average at best. Finally, we have this overhead battle minigame where you control either a boat or a jet ski and shoot at enemies while playing keep away with the treasure chest or collecting snowflakes. You might as well be collecting diatomic oxygen molecules. This minigame practically describes itself, so let's move on. Much like Banjo Tooie-Grunty's Revenge offers a decent roster of bosses, but much like the minigames, they're nothing special. The Tooie bosses were mixed between too easy to be fun and too annoying to be fun, while these bosses are all too easy to be fun. Did you enjoy fighting the same Klungo boss with minor changes in the last game? Well, congratulations! Prepare to fight the same Klungo boss 3 additional times. You'll also face off with Mecha Grunty several times, and she functions identically to the Klungo boss. The remaining 2 bosses use a pseudo TPS mode where you strafe back and forth and shoot at targets. It's actually not that bad, but you only do this twice in the whole game. Ultimately, the bosses are just mediocre, and that's really all there is to say about Grunty's Revenge on GBA. It has great controls and strong visuals and excellent music, but it's all in service of a half-assed story, okay stages, mediocre minigames, and repetitive bosses. Did I have some fun? Sure, I was enjoying the ride while it lasted, enough to 100% the game, but looking back, this isn't an experience I'll be clamoring to revisit.
But Exo, it was a GBA game. What did you expect?
A lot better, actually. In 2002, Universal Interactive released Spyro 2 Season of Flame for the GBA, an isometric 2D platformer developed by Digital Eclipse. While Season of Ice was kind of a mixed bag, Season of Flame was a significant improvement with tight controls, excellent level design, decent minigames, fun alternate playstyles, and a fantastic soundtrack. Not only did it look and play well, but this game had 20 odd levels to explore, roughly 4 times as many as Grunty's Revenge. Season of Flame is a fantastic game that ranks right up there with the original trilogy in my eyes, and for a GBA game, that's pretty damn impressive. Grunty's Revenge, meanwhile, is just okay, and ends the moment it starts getting good. I can recommend it to hardcore fans of Banjo Kazooie, but otherwise, you're not missing much if you choose to skip it. Of course, there was also a mobile version of Grunty's Revenge, developed by Infusio for Java 2 mobile platforms and released in 2004. One thing I should note is that this game is completely broken in the free J2ME emulator, with the game failing to keep track of whether you've already collected music notes and resetting your save data when you die. Thus, I switched to K emulator for the purposes of this review, and it seemed to fix all the memory issues. Honestly, this version isn't as bad as I was expecting, but that's not saying much. The controls were designed for a flip phone keypad, and seeing as there were only so many buttons to choose from, the designers had to limit Banjo's movement to 4 directions. That doesn't sound like it would be too bad, and for the most part it isn't, but it makes certain platforming sections more annoying than they were in GBA. Fighting enemies in general is just harder without diagonal movement, which gets frustrating when enemies start taking up to 4 consecutive hits to defeat. The limited button selection also means that the backflip and talon trot were removed, along with the shock spring jump and wonder wing. Mumbo Transformations are also MIA. You can still shoot eggs and choose from regular, ice, and fire eggs, but the toll walls from the original were removed, and the ice eggs don't don't seem to have any practical use, as opposed to the fire eggs, which become your de facto attack method in Freezing Furnace since they do double damage. The feathery flap returns, but it controls much more like Spyro's glide than the feathery flap. Moreover, the timing for the button press is extremely precise and feels nothing like the feathery flap did in the other games. It's frustrating and it never got any better no matter how long I played the game. Speaking of controls, I've ran into this issue where sometimes the controls would act like I was holding down a key when I wasn't, which led me to fall off platforms or simply die. Visually, the game looks okay. It's more or less the same sprites and tile sets from the GBA version. Depending on the resolution of your phone, the game could run up to 240 by 320, which is essentially 2 GBA screens stacked on top of each other. However, the game also runs at roughly 10 FPS, which is completely unacceptable for an action platformer. If Game Boy games could run at 60 FPS, then why couldn't this? Speaking of which, some levels are significantly different from the original, missing locations, puzzles, platforming sections, etc. In the case of Freezing Furnace, the furnace part is replaced with more freezing. The sound design is absolutely horrendous. I guess Java 2 mobile platforms were just severely limited for space and memory in this regard, but was it so much to ask to have both music and sound effects at the same time? Again, the black and white Game Boy from 1989 managed this feat with only 8 kilobytes of SRAM. The music only lasts for 10 seconds before disappearing, and it will cut off even earlier if you collect a music note or kill an enemy. There are maybe 5 sound effects in the whole game, so 90% of the time the game is completely silent. Everything is MIDI based too, so it will sound different depending on your phone. If we couldn't have both music and sound effects, I would have much preferred just having music and actually making it loop. The swimming sections were also removed, meaning that all the water in the game is now instant kill even when it wasn't in the original. Klungo never appears in the game at all, and for that matter, the opening and ending cutscenes were severely truncated and Bozai appears in the present for some reason. Without Klungo, that leaves the 3 Mecha Grunty bosses as the only bosses in the game. They function identically to their GBA counterparts, but it's much harder to hit Grunty when you can't move diagonally. Moreover, the second Grunty boss is unbeatable because she spawns these 2 blobs that will attach to you and kill you in 5 seconds. In the GBA version, you can just flick the D-pad back and forth and they'll disappear. However, in the mobile version, this doesn't work for some reason, meaning you have to go out of your way to avoid these guys. Since you have to kill these 2 blobs to lower Grunty's shield, it means that this optional second Grunty fight is basically unbeatable. On that note, there's this high ledge in Spiller's Harbor that seems completely unreachable. There's no backflip move in this version, and your jump doesn't reach that high, nor is there an alternate passage that takes you up to that ledge. The last Jiggy, Honeycomb, and 2 music notes are all up on this ledge, so unfortunately I couldn't 100% this version because it's simply not possible from what I can tell. In before, the 2 people who have actually played this version comment and call me an idiot for not knowing how to get up there. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't change my opinion that much. And speaking of which, that's all there really is to say about this version, honestly. At best, it's simply a downgrade of an already mediocre game, and at worst, it's a big piece of crap. Either way, I don't recommend it. At the end of the day, the Java 2 mobile platform was simply not powerful or robust enough to support an action game like this, and Grunty's Revenge Mobile suffers for it. You might have noticed the mobile version didn't have any minigames, and that's because the developers decided to release them as a separate game. Grunty's Revenge Missions for Java 2 Mobile Edition. Surprisingly, this game is actually okay. The minigames are framed around Gruntilda pulling a King Boo and imprisoning Kazooie in a painting, meaning Banjo needs to earn 8 Jiggies to rescue her. Thus, you play all the minigames from the GBA version back to back, minus the 2 forgettable overhead shooter stages. This version runs at 240 by 266 and features higher resolution sprites and backgrounds for some of the minigames, notably the fishing ones. There's also a bunch of garbage on the bottom 54 lines, but I imagine this would have been hidden behind black on an actual phone. Unfortunately, we're once again looking at a max frame rate of 10 FPS, which isn't too bad for simple minigames, but still feels like playing a slideshow. All the problems with the fishing minigame from the GBA version carry over here as well, but surprisingly, the slide minigame is actually a little better here. Instead of attempting an awkward pseudo 3D perspective, the mobile version shows the slide straight on, making it much easier to line yourself up to collect objects and avoid hazards. The final minigame type is the TPS mode, featuring the 2 bosses. Surprisingly, the pirate is much harder than Grunty due to him randomly appearing on the screen and the low frame rate making it difficult to line up your shots. There's no sound effects in this game, but I'm fine with that because the music actually loops this time. What a concept! And yeah, that's all I've got. So, cross-platform. Which game is MVP and why? To nobody's surprise, I nominate the Game Boy Advance version for cross-platform MVP. The mobile games suffer from their platform, and I suppose that given the limitations, Infusio did the best they could with the resources they had. Nevertheless, these games look, sound, perform, and play worse than the GBA version. And that's not to mention all the content that was cut, or the fact that the GBA version has both the platforming and minigames in one convenient package. Thus, if this review convinced you to check out Grunty's Revenge, then I strongly recommend picking it up on Game Boy Advance. And with that, we're finally done with the Banjo Minithon. Will I review Banjo Pilot or Nuts and Bolts? Maybe someday, but not now. Join me next time when we finally give everyone's Purple Dragon the remake or Rebreak treatment he deserves. If you liked today's review, make sure to give it a like and consider subscribing for more. You can also find me on the Unversed cast, where I meet up with Haydox, Ryrule, and King K to talk about video games and read bad fan fiction.
One of my favorite side quests, just period, in any Zelda game, is when you're fighting Orca to see how many hits you can land on him, because fighting is just a lot of fun for some reason.
Dude, no.
Like,
take that back. Take that back.
No! I like it because you can tilt the analog stick.
I fucking hate Orca.
I think it's fun. You can tilt the analog stick in different directions, and then Link will have different animations and shit. That's cool. It doesn't really add anything, but it's nice. It's
fucking Orca. The fight where you're encouraged to do the 3-hit combo, wait, and then do the 3-hit combo again. Because if you get hit 3 times, and you have to hit him 500 times to get what you want.
Yeah. It's
500 times. Why the fuck would they do that?
I don't know.
You can find video versions of the podcast on YouTube and an audio version on SoundCloud and iTunes. I also have a Let's Play channel, EPG Plays, where I offer informative playthroughs on games I like and some I don't. It's also the new home of Zebro's Play, sillier playthroughs I do with my brother.
Can we all appreciate how anatomically correct the fact that the moon is right behind the bell end?
What the fuck was that joke?
Go on. Keep playing.
Oh my god.
Keep playing. You'll never look at this scene the same.
Be sure to go check those out. Until next time, I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I hope you enjoyed the review.